15. Malou, could you do me a favor?
What?
I need my Bible. I left it in the office. I have it here, but I need to have it just in case. Luke chapter 15. It's a familiar text, but it's probably one of my favorites in all the Scripture. Verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered. They grumbled. They complained. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there's more rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So the father divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, and he was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, and he threw his arms around him, and he kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' And the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years waiting for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and now he is found." Is there a better story than that one? At the heart of what it means to be a disciple is to have the heart of the Father. And if there's ever a passage that gets at what the heart of the Father is, here it is. He's the one who's waiting for us to take any turn in His direction. He's the one who's willing to forgive us of whatever we've done wrong. He's the one who ought to hold a grudge against us, but refuses to. He, in love and grace and mercy and kindness, receives us back. In fact, when He sees us going in His direction, He runs out to get us. And He puts His arms around us and He kisses us and He says, "Let's have a party. My son is home." A disciple is one who cares about lost people. Lost people. You know, I don't know about you, but I lose things all the time. I'm pretty good at losing things. Sometimes I find them. Usually they're in my office underneath a book somewhere. But occasionally, there are some things I can't ever find. In London, there's a place that on Baker Street. You know, Baker Street, if you're a Sherlock Holmes fan, it's where he supposedly had his place. On Baker Street, there's an office for lost things. So if you lose it on a subway, on a bus, anything public transportation, it goes to this little office on Baker Street in London. Here's just one. This is aisle 11, just clothing that's been lost. And here's a couple other things that the proprietor of the establishment, and the man in charge, has. I don't know about the monkey outfit and the wheelchair. I don't know if they were together at the time or if he put them together. But in any case, there's some pretty strange things that he finds that people have lost. So it says in an article I was just reading about it that since 1933, it has been collecting lost items and then trying to find the people they belong to. And every year between 150,000 and 200,000 items are found and turned into this LPO office, is what they call it, the Lost Property Office. Every year people lose wheelchairs, false teeth, watches, backpacks, lunch pails, umbrellas, cell phones, and what have you. One recent year there were 38,000 books, 29,000 bags, and 28,000 pieces of clothing that were turned in, including such oddities as human remains, a suitcase full of money, a human skull, and, my favorite, a lawnmower. How do you lose a lawnmower? I don't know. But in any case, someone did. Not sure if it was a riding lawnmower or which one, but in any case, it's hard to imagine losing it on public transportation. But someone did. We lose stuff all the time. But it's most important that we realize that the most important things that are lost in this world are those who don't know our Lord Jesus. And those lost things, God has a heart for. And we ought to share His heart. Just this morning I was checking my email and I saw there was an article from a newspaper that I always keep track of the places where I've lived and get the summaries of news and I just read the headlines. Most of the time I don't read the articles because I could care less what's happening in Minneapolis or Cincinnati or Middletown, Ohio or Portland, Oregon. But occasionally I see something that catches my eye. And this morning this one caught my eye, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. The lead story in the newspaper was this: fastest growing religion is none. 1 of 4 Americans now belong to no religion, a trend fueling church closings and mergings. And it goes on to describe something that wasn't new to me. I've read about this in other places. I've read books talking about how we ought to stem the tide of what's going on in our society. But nonetheless, it's pretty stark when you realize that about a quarter of the people in our country say, we're asked, are you a Christian, are you a Jew, are you a Buddhist, are you a Muslim, are you a Protestant or Catholic, what are you? And they would say, none. I'm none of the above. I don't belong to any of those things. Now, of course, there's some who belong to organized religion who are lost too. But we can be sure that this 1/4 of our population doesn't know our Lord Jesus. They're like lost sheep, lost coins, or lost sons in need of someone to find them. By generation, look what's happening. The earliest, the silent generation, people from 1928 to 1945, well, there were 9% to 11% who called themselves atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular, which is plenty of people. Baby boomers from 1946 to 1964, some of us might be right there. 14 to 17% say, I'm either atheist, agnostic, or I don't have any affiliation. Generation X, if you were born between 1965 and 1980, 19% in 2007, and now in 2014 the survey says 23% say, I don't have any religion. Older millennials, 1981 to 1989, 25% to 34%. And then, this will tear your heart out, younger millennials, it wasn't data in 2007, they're too young, but in 2014, 36% say, I'm either an atheist, an agnostic, or I would say I don't have any religion. 36%. What does God think about that? I have a feeling that He sees those lost sheep. And He cares about those lost sheep. He cares about those lost coins. And He cares about those lost sons and daughters who don't have a clue. They're out there, they're wandering around, they don't even know they need God. But they do. Because deep down we all do. We all need to have a relationship with God. And these are people that don't even have a clue and aren't searching and aren't looking. They're just out there wandering aimlessly. Some of them maybe grew up even in the church and have gone off to do their own thing. All around us are prodigals. All around us are wandering sheep, all kinds of people, asking, they're still, they call themselves spiritual sometimes, or think that they have some sort of relationship with God in some cases. But they've given up on religion, they've given up on, and they've never really found Jesus. Now, recently I was just reading a book about this particular generation and what the church ought to do about it. It's called Growing Young. It's a study by the Fuller Youth Institute. Since I went to Fuller, I kind of thought that would be a good read. And what it was interesting, I was reading one of the chapters, and what it said was there are 3 questions at the heart when they survey this younger generation. What are they looking for in life? And there's 3 questions that come up repeatedly on surveys. Who am I? Where do I fit? And what difference do I make? 3 questions that drive most people, and especially this millennial generation, this younger generation that has largely rejected the church and organized religion. What are they saying? Who am I? And where do I belong? Or where do I fit? And what difference do I make? Interestingly, 3 questions that it seems to me God has something to say about. And we have something as a church to say about if we take up the heart of God and the mission of God that He has for us. So, let's take a look at this text. Because to me, this is the heart of God for lost people. Whether they realize they're lost or not. Most of the time we don't know when we're lost. We think we're doing just fine. I'll be driving along, and I'll be in conversation with Malou, and this is when it always happens, or I'll be daydreaming if I'm by myself, or listening to a song or something. And all of a sudden, I'll notice that things are becoming unfamiliar. It happens to me all the time. And I'm driving along. So, I thought I was driving on this road, and now it looks like this doesn't look familiar to me at all. And I start thinking, maybe this is just a part of the road I haven't thought of, I just don't remember right now. Maybe if I keep driving, eventually I'll find out where I'm supposed to be. But And then it just seems to get more and more unfamiliar. And eventually I give up and I turn around and I go back and see, well, maybe I'll figure out where it was. But of course I'm never going to ask anybody for directions because that wouldn't be the thing to do. So I just kind of drive around and hopefully eventually figure out where I'm supposed to be. Often when we're lost, we don't have a clue that we're lost. But we have to come to our senses like the prodigal son. And we have to go back home to the heart of our Father. So a little bit about the background of the text. In verses 1 to 3, we find out why Jesus gives these stories at all. It has to do with the complaints of the tax collectors, or not tax collectors, of the Pharisees and the religious scribes. In verse 1, now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, which is kind of interesting in itself. They didn't particularly like Jesus by this point. They had already made all kinds of complaints about what he was doing things on the Sabbath and violating what they saw as the right interpretation of the law. And here again, they're complaining because of the people he's associating with. Tax collectors and sinners? What are you doing? These people are unclean. These are not good people. These are not the kind of people you want to associate with. And so Jesus had a story, actually a couple stories for him that all fit together. They kind of come with a 1, 2, 3 punch. It's like, if you didn't get the first time, I'm going to give you another one, and then I'm going to give you even more pointed story about what I'm trying to say here. So he begins with this parable, and basically what he seems to be saying here, and I'll just kind of put Joel Green up here to give you a little bit more of a scholarly approach to it. But basically what Joel Green is saying here in this text is the way I would say it is this. Jesus' ministry is a reflection of God's heart for the lost. That's one thing he's wanting to say. What I'm doing reflects the heart of God for people. What you're doing by excluding these people and by complaining and murmuring about what I'm doing is missing out on what the heart of God is for lost people. And then secondly, Jesus is inviting us to join in God's mission by reflecting on God's heart for the lost. We want to we want to understand the heart of God for lost people so that it becomes our heart. That's the point. So, in this text, Jesus here is kind of, again, building on this idea that he's expressed in other places. In Luke 5:31, he says, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. And then in Luke 19:10, he says it this way, the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. That's why I've come. Why? Because lost people matter to God. Lost people matter to God. Therefore, he said, that's what my ministry is all about. So, at its heart, what we see in these wonderful stories is that God cares for lost people. Again, Joel Green. In the divine economy, the repentance of sinners, restoration of the lost, is grounds for celebration. These parables are theological, providing an insight into God's own disposition regarding sinners, vis-a-vis sinners. This is what God thinks about people who are lost. This is his heart. This is what your God thinks about all those people around us who aren't going to church this morning. Maybe not the ones out at the veterans thing. But we're not sure about that. But no, I'm just kidding. And he gives us three basic stories. Well, I'm going to say that really there's 4. But there's the lost sheep, the lost coins, and then we have 2 lost sons. We always focus on the prodigal son. But you know what? Jesus' point was probably about the other son. Even more so. Because there's 2 lost sons. There was the one who squandered his life in riotous living, wild living. He took the money and he spent it on the prostitutes and things like this, it says in the text. I mean, he really wasted his life. Just lived wild life. And he used the prodigal son that we so often think about. And God loves the prodigals. But he also loves the self-righteous one that did all the right things. But feels like his father's being unfair by having a party for the other son. And you can see why he might feel that way. We often do, don't we? So Jesus gives us 3 stories. The first one about 100 sheep. And it's a fascinating little story. Basically, there's 100 sheep. You got a shepherd. He's in charge of 100 sheep. So this apparently is a pretty wealthy shepherd, or maybe an owner of these things. Most people had like 5 or 6 maybe, and he has 100. But in any case, this sheep herder has 100 sheep, and one of them wanders away. Now that's not surprising. Sheep do those sorts of things. Sheep like to wander, and that's why they have those, those canes with the hook on the end, and because we have this tendency to want to do our own thing, and that's representative of all of us. All we like sheep have gone astray, Isaiah says. Paul reiterates it in Romans. We're all like sheep. And sheep like to do their own thing. They like to get away and check out new territory and find out what's going on. They want to look over the cliff over here, not realizing that if he takes one step too far, well, goodbye, Mr. Sheep. But in any case, we're like sheep. And we have a shepherd. And he sees that there's one lost sheep. What does he do? He leaves the 99 to go after the one. What incredible love our God has for lost people. If there's one sheep who's missing, he goes out of his way to find that lost sheep. And then when he does, he has a big party for this. He says in chapter 15, verse 6, he goes home after he finds it. He calls his friends and neighbors together and he says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep." And I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. Now, if you'd been one of the Pharisees, what would you have thought about that story? I bet you wouldn't have liked that story very much, because he knows that Jesus is talking about those unclean people. Those people he associates with that we think he shouldn't be associating with. And he's leaving the Pharisees and the good people and those Sabbath-keeping Jewish people that are in the synagogue every Sunday, and leaving to go for tax collectors and sinners and people like that. What does he think he's doing? You see what he's... And then beyond that, when he finds the lost sheep, he says, we all need to celebrate. No, the rest of the sheep don't want to celebrate. But that's indeed what we're called to do. And it's interesting the way it puts it here. And it says the same thing in all 3 of the major stories. That there is rejoicing in heaven. There's rejoicing in the presence of the angels when the lost is found. And the idea of that is that God is the one who's at the center of the celebration. Yes, the angels are rejoicing, but notice it's in the presence of the angels that there's rejoicing. God himself is at the heart of the celebration, be sure of it. God, in his love and his grace and his mercy and his kindness, when he sees a lost sheep come back home, he's at the heart of the one who says, let's celebrate. Let's have a party. Let's celebrate the return of this lost sheep. Or in verse 8, a woman has 10 silver coins and she loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? Notice what diligence she gives to this. This is your God. Seeking after, looking after, searching after the lost coin. And if one sheep out of 99 was valuable to a poor woman who had only 10 coins, if you lost one of them, it's even more important, more worth than would the other. In any case, here she is. She calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin." Same as we had in the other story, right? We're going to have a party. We're going to rejoice. In the same way, I tell you, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. There's a celebration in heaven every time a lost person comes home. Now it's interesting. Luke has this thing he likes to do, where he'll tell a story about a man, and he'll tell a story about a woman. He always likes to make sure that women are included in his stories. And that might bring some comfort and encouragement to some of you. It's all the way through the book of Luke. It's like that. He'll tell a story about the disciples, and then he'll talk about Mary or the women, or he'll have a parable about some man who was a shepherd in a field, and then the next one's about a woman who lost some coins. He's saying something about the people who were following Jesus, that everyone's included, even those that society were rejecting, even in the way he tells these stories. So at the heart of this story, and these two stories, and the one that we're getting to, is God's heart for lost people. And there's two things in particular I want you to focus on in that regard. One of them is that grace, which accepts, saves, and trains us in righteousness. Grace is at the heart of what what God expresses for each of us. That in His heart, God is gracious to us. And that's the only explanation you can get of this whole story about the prodigal son. It's not something that's earned or deserved, but it's given graciously. There's an acceptance that comes, even though it's not what he deserved. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in his book Life Together, says, "It is the grace of the gospel which is so hard for the pious to understand. It confronts us with truth and says, 'You're a sinner, a great, desperate sinner. Now come, as the sinner that you are, to God, who loves you. He wants you as you are. He does not want anything from you, a sacrifice, a work. He wants you alone. My son, give me thine heart.'" Proverbs 23:26. God has come to you to save the sinner. See, that's where we all start. Although we're created in the image of God, meant to be like Him, sin enters the picture. In our pride and our arrogance, we go our own way. Like sheep that like to stray, so we like to stray. And therefore we get beat up and burned out and bummed out by life. And in all that, God looks at us and He says, "You know what? I'm going to show grace toward you." But we first of all have to humble ourselves and say, "You know what? I need grace. I need God. I can't do this by myself." So often we think, "Oh, if I just try hard, maybe God will be pleased with me." No, that's not the way in. The way in is by humbling ourselves and freely accepting the grace that God gives you. It's the only way in. We have to say, "Oh yeah, I am a sinner, and I need a Savior." But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. Filled with compassion, he ran to his son, and he threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said, "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." He doesn't even get to finish the sentence about becoming a hired servant. And the father says to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet, bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Did the prodigal son deserve the celebration? No. That's the point of the story. He was a bad kid. He didn't do what his father wanted. He did the opposite of what his father wanted. He took his inheritance and he went and he wasted all of the property and all of the money and everything, and he didn't even do it in a way that was respectable. He went and wasted it on all kinds of riotous party. I mean, he just partied everything he could do. And he spent it on prostitutes and all these different things. I mean, could he have done anything more shameful? No. I mean, and then for a good Jewish boy, it's like, I came to the end of my rope, and guess what I had to do? I had to feed pigs. And for a good Jewish boy, that's the last thing you would want to do. In fact, there's all kinds of curses and things that are said in the New Testament, or in the Old Testament literature, as well as the in between the Second Temple Judaism literature, about how shameful it would be to have to farm with pigs, to be with pigs. And I take that personally, having grown up on a pig farm. But nonetheless, back for Jewish people, that was a big thing. And what the story is telling us is this is a guy who does not deserve the grace of God. He doesn't deserve to be saved. He deserves to be lost. He's done everything he can to go in the other direction. When he realized that he was lost, he stepped on the accelerator instead of turning around. But eventually, things got so bad, as he was thinking, even those pods, that pig food, that's starting to look good to me right now. That's about as low as you can go as a good Jewish boy. And so he came to his senses and he said, oh, even my father's servants are doing better than this. Maybe I'll go back to my dad and he'll take me in as a slave. I'd be better off as a slave under my dad than I would be here. And then what happens, so he takes the step, he repents. He turns the other direction and he says, oh, I've made a mess of things. I'm going to go back home and I'm going to present myself to be a slave. Which would have been something. But his father had something else in mind. When he began to talk about that, he stops a mid-sentence before he even talked about being a slave. And he says, he puts his arms around, he runs out to him, he puts his arms around him, he kisses him, and he declares a celebration. And he brings him all these gifts and all these different things. And he invites everyone to this big celebration because the lost has been found. The one who was dead is now alive. As far as he was concerned, he didn't know what happened to his son, but he was looking for his son. And God's looking too. He's looking at you. He keeps looking. He's looking for us to take a step in his direction. And there's some people think, I don't know about that. But he is. That's the heart of your Father. He's looking for lost people to take a step in the right direction. To say, you know what, this looks like unfamiliar territory, maybe I need to turn around. Things are not going so good here. Maybe I should come home. God's looking for us to come home to his love and to his grace. And the scripture tells us if we humble ourselves and accept his gift of grace, there's salvation. There's so many blessings that come to us when we just turn our hearts toward home, toward our Heavenly Father. The other part that's at the heart of his grace is his love. God's heart for lost people is that he loves them. No, God is not only loving. I want you to listen. God is not only loving, God is love. Well, what did you say, Pastor? Well, he's loving, but the reason that he's loving is because he is love. Think about it with me. We love because he first loved us. Brennan Manning said, Christianity is not essentially a philosophy of love, but a love affair. Soren Kierkegaard has some journals and prayers that are just fascinating. In one particular one, he's talking about the love of God. And here's what he says. He says, it's really remarkable that while all the other attributes ascribed to God are adjectives, love alone is a substantive. And it would scarcely occur to one to make the mistake of saying God is lovely or loving. Thus, language itself has given expression to the substantial element that's found in this attribute. So God is not just loving or lovely, but he is love. There's not a thing that God does that doesn't flow out of his love. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't have wrath and anger towards sin. But the reason he has wrath and anger towards sin is because of his love. He sees how it beats up the people who are hurt by sin. He sees the injustice. He sees the things that happen and the hurt that's caused by it all. And that's why he's angry, and that's why there's wrath. You see, even wrath flows out of his love. There's not a thing that he does for us that doesn't flow out of a heart for you. It is loving. Sometimes people try to blame this or that or the other thing on God. He said, no, my heart for you is love. Now, there might be things that come into our lives that don't seem very loving at the moment, but he turns those things around for his good and for his glory. You can be sure that at the heart, God is love. That is who he is. Now, Kierkegaard went on to pray a prayer that I love. In fact, I've got this hanging in my office. So I like to think about this one. Here's what it is. You have loved us first, O God. Alas, we speak of in terms of history, as if you loved us first, but a single time. Rather than that, without ceasing, you have loved us first, many times, and every day, and our whole life through. When we wake up in the morning and we turn our soul toward you, you were there first. You have loved us first. If I rise at dawn and at the same time, at the same second, turn my soul toward you in prayer, you are there ahead of me. You have loved me first. And when I withdraw from the distractions of the day and I turn my soul toward you, you are there first, and thus forever. And yet we speak ungratefully as if you have loved us first, only once. God loves you first, always. You can't ever beat him in loving. He loves you, and in the morning when you wake up and you turn your heart toward him, he already loved you. Every day. When you go to bed at night and you turn your heart toward him and say, Lord, I'm ready for bed, and you turn your heart toward him, guess what? He was there first. He always loved you. He loves us first, always. I don't know if you get all that, but it's one of those you got to think about. James Bryan Smith paraphrased it a little bit. He said, we love because God first loved us, not only once, but always. He loved us first, not only once in history, but always. That's the heart of God. For you and for lost people everywhere. He is love, and all that he does is loving. He is faithful. So, let's just briefly consider the prodigal and the other son. We know the story, so we don't have to read it all again, do we? The thing that's just amazing to me about the prodigal son story, the first part of the story, is how he has just taken every step in the wrong direction. And no matter what he does, the Father is there looking for his return. And is that not the way our lives are? We do a lot of wandering and straying. And it's the delight the Father has when we return, when we turn to him, that is just the amazing part of this story. There's a celebration that goes on, led by God in heaven, around all the angels. They're all celebrating whenever there's a lost one that comes home. Just yesterday, Malou was out doing some Christmas decorating, and somehow or another, our Olivia, our cat, got outside. She wandered out, and she was out wandering around, and Malou was all worried, because I had gone over here to the church for a while, and I got this frantic phone call. Olivia's out, and she's wandering around, and I can't get her. And so, okay, I'll come home and I'll find her. So we went searching, and she went inside this tube. There's a great big culvert that goes from the ditch over to the pond. And it was a big long one that goes underneath the road. And so, oh man, how are we going to get her out of here? Well, she'd already gone to the other side and was wandering around. But in any case, we found her, and we had a celebration. We didn't bring out the fatted calf, but we did bring out the cat snacks. And we had a little celebration that the one who was lost had been found. But in a small way, that's what's going on every time when the prodigal comes home. God's heart is love and grace toward those. There's a worship song going around these days that says, "Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God that chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it and I don't deserve it. Still, you give your life, your love away, yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God." And I think that's what we see in this text. But clearly, it's the other part of the story that we tend to miss, that's so instructive to us. Remember that the Pharisees were grumbling, murmuring. It's an interesting word. It was something that the Pharisees and the scribes do quite a bit about Jesus' mission. They like to grumble about it. 15:2, 18:11, 19:7, about Zacchaeus, Levi or Matthew, the elder brother in Luke 15, the vineyard workers in Matthew 20, Simon toward the sinful woman. The word is this one: It's the same word that was used in the Septuagint for the people of Israel. Remember when the people of Israel were out in the wilderness? And they were lost. And they didn't know they were lost. Well, they kind of knew they were lost. And they were longing for going back to Egypt. They were missing the leeks and the onions, which would drive me crazy, but some people maybe like that. They wanted to go back to slavery in Egypt. They grumbled against Moses and against Aaron in the wilderness. It's the same word that's being used here to describe the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And it's the same thing that describes the older brother's reaction to the celebration that took place because of the prodigal son coming home. He grumbled. He murmured. He muttered. Same word. It never has good effect in the Bible, Old Testament or New. Eugene Peterson, in his excellent little treatment of this, said the people murmured not because they were bad and evil, but because they were good and scared. That's probably true. It was self-righteousness that was at the heart of the Pharisees who were complaining and grumbling. They were self-righteous, just like the younger brother. Remember? Am I not the good son? Am I not the one who stayed home? Am I not the one who did everything that you wanted me to do? There was a sense of self-righteousness that this younger son had that was very typical of what we saw in the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. There was a self-righteousness that had to be broken through. Until you recognize that you too are a prodigal, you won't enter into the celebration. Much could be said about it, but let's just pull it together. God's heart is that we would join him in his mission. That we too would celebrate when lost people are found. That we would go out of our way to search diligently for those lost coins. That we would look for those wandering sheep. That we'd go all out for lost people, to share the love of God and the grace of God with them. This is God's heart for lost people, and so it is for us. So God's heart is that we would join him in the mission and lay down our self-righteousness and our pride and our sense of entitlement and join him in celebrating the return of lost people. So let love and grace motivate you to mission. I want to just return briefly to this. The three things the younger generation is looking for, and probably all of us are looking for, at our core. Who am I? Where do I fit? What difference do I make? Answered by grace, love, and mission. Which is exactly Jesus' point in this text. When we get the love of God, when we understand it, when we understand how loved we are by God, and how much he loves those people in the world who are lost, who don't have a clue, when we really get that, when we really understand his grace and his love, and we're on mission to reach as many of those lost people as we can, then we have identity as sons and daughters of God. And we belong among the people of God, among the assembled saints of God, and where we're loved. And we have a mission to bring the love of God to those who most desperately need to receive it. The wandering, lost sheep. So let's have a party, people. Let's be a people who long to rejoice and celebrate the coming home of lost people. Let's do everything we can to bring the lost people in and to go out and find the lost people, just as you would to find your lost sheep, your lost coin, or your lost child. That's what ought to motivate us as well in our mission. So let's pray. Father, help us to be a people who cares deeply about lost people, just as you do. Help us to learn how to love them and show grace toward them and accept them even as you accept us. To forgive them when they wrong us or when they make wrong choices. And then, Lord, by your loving kindness, draw those people to you. And help us to see what we can do to be a part of reaching out to lost people, I pray. And we pray in Jesus' name.